Today I'm joined by Stewart Brown, and today's presentation is called Using AI to Make Better Decisions. As I said, I'm joined with Stewart Brown today. Mr. Brown is a principal with Dunkirk Partners with more than 45 years of experience in management and leadership at all levels. This includes strategic, operational, tactical, military, and civilian. Stewart is also instructor in our Strategic Thinking and Leadership Academy. It's also the certificate in Strategic Thinking and Leadership, and also teaches the course Thinking to Thrive. With that said, I would like to turn it over to Stewart. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. And if you go to the first slide, we'll start there. All right, so here we go. Welcome to another session of Knowledge at Noon, presented by Georgetown University and the School of Continuing Studies, where I work. Jonathan was nice enough to give me a little bit of an intro. I also teach some other courses occasionally at Georgetown, including some finance courses and some strategic planning. I've been there for about 8 years, and it's a lot of fun. An adjunct professor there and also up here at the U.S. Army War College. So let's go to the next slide and talk about why we're here today. So a report was published on the 8th of May in 2024 by Microsoft, LinkedIn, and AI. And this slide really speaks pretty much for itself. The use of generative AI has nearly doubled in the last 6 months, with 75% of global knowledge workers using it. That's pretty healthy. 66% of leaders say they wouldn't hire someone without AI skills. 71% say that they'd rather hire a less experienced candidate with AI skills than a more experienced candidate without them. That's tough for the older guys. And junior candidates may have a new edge. 77% of the leaders with AI early in career talent will be given greater responsibilities. I will also tell you that in my course at Georgetown and also up here at the War College, I've taken some independent polls, and I find the numbers of people who actually use AI, at least in the courses that I'm involved in, is lesser than this, which is kind of interesting. So what we're going to talk about here today, let's go to the next slide. 39% of the people globally who use AI have gotten AI training from their company. So everybody's concerned about it. We need to know what it can do for us and what it can do to us. And it's pretty obvious the employers are desperate to have people who do this. And again, I find individually, personally, that not a majority of the people that I work with use it. So what we're going to talk about today is pretty straightforward stuff. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to look at one way, okay, about this. This is an outline what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about, again, not the way, but one way that we can use AI. We're going to define a couple of different types of AI and focus on the one that we'll be working with. We're going to talk briefly about how AI is constructed and what it can do. And again, there are probably members of the audience here that have more experience in this than I do, but this is how I've learned it. I've been to a couple of courses, just finished one recently up at Harvard, teaching with AI, which was very interesting. We're also going to talk about briefly, again, how it's constructed, and then we're going to go through an example, actually two examples. One is going to be just here, take a look at it, and then the other one is going to be, here's how we use AI to actually do it. So with all those caveats, we need to also note, and it's the bottom of this one, noting the pitfalls, potholes, and ambushes, hallucinations, and other ways that AI can hurt you in the decision-making process. This is getting better by the day. Can you share any good introductory AI courses? We'll get to those questions later. Thank you very much. So this is kind of the Miranda warning. AI is really good. I've been using it now for a couple of years, and it has gotten dramatically better. As a matter of fact, I wrote this basic brief about 5 weeks ago and had to rewrite it because there's some new stuff coming out. It's making leaps and bounds, but it's still got some issues. So let's go to the next slide, just real quickly. Next slide, please.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay, so it's pretty obvious. You look at me, I am not a digital native, okay? I graduated high school in 1965, got my undergrad degree at the University of California in 1970, where we were actually using computers, I will say. We had a dumb dumb terminal that hooked in by telephone lines to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory where we could do some economic work. The only problem is we had to do it between 2 and 4 in the morning. It was a little tough on my social schedule. Got my MBA in 1980 from NYU. Again, by that time, we were using some low level of computer capability, but I got almost 50 years in banking, finance, consulting, military service, and teaching. And particularly in the banking and finance industry, and then in the consulting industry, computerization became much more important. But now I'm using AI to assist me in making decisions, teaching, doing analysis, getting ideas, and as a sounding board. And those are really kind of the themes and things we're going to talk about. Next page, please. So we're going to talk about generative AI, and this is one of the definitions here provided by our friends at Wikipedia, who are moderately dependable on this kind of thing. So generative artificial intelligence, generative AI, GenAI, or just GAI, is an artificial intelligence capable of generating text, image, videos, and other data using generative, i.e. probability-based models in response to prompts. Want to go to the next slide? Because I want to highlight a couple of things. You'll note I highlighted in that first paragraph, probability-based. This is a key part of it. AI does not have all the knowledge in the world, and how it's constructed is a probability algorithm to give you what it thinks is the best answer. So generative AI models learn the patterns and structure of their input training data, that's the data input by the models to developers, and then generate new data, excuse me, that has similar characteristics. And one of the things, again, that I want to focus on here is this is a probability-built model, so things are mostly good, but they can go wrong. So let's go to the next slide, please. Here's another definition by our friends at Gartner. Next slide, please. And I wanted to highlight some of the key parts of this one. It's a machine-based learning model, so it's still a machine. It gets input from us, but it's radically different than just a database. It's trained to create new data rather than making a prediction about a data set. This is a whole different world. I spent most of my almost all of my professional life making decisions on specific data sets. As a banker, as a real estate developer, as a finance guy, we would deal with a set of data and infer from what we had there. This goes another step further. It learns to generate more objects that look like the data it was trained on. So this is kind of like building a set of heuristics. And that's kind of good news and sometimes not so good news. But anyway, that's really how it works. Next page, please. I want to talk for a couple of minutes, since we're going to be talking about making decisions, about the rational decision process. Most human decisions we've learned are actually made using emotions, bias, fear, et cetera, rather than logic. So I want to talk a couple of seconds about the rational decision process because that's the process we're going to use. In other words, and in this particular case, rational decision process has many forms, but for this discussion, we're going to focus on the process used to choose between alternative solutions. In other words, how to choose the best solution from multiple proposed courses of action, or to decide between different investment opportunities, different proposed solutions to a problem set, or to determine priorities, excuse me, or to logically rank order a set of desired outcomes. Very handy and a large part of the decision process. Next slide, please. Here's kind of the basics of the rational decision process. So when you're faced with a situation where you need to choose between multiple alternatives, you need to do the following things to come to a rational decision. You need to clarify the problem. Any of you who have particularly any of you who've ever spent any time in the military will understand that the military decision-making process starts out with clarify the question. You don't want to take the wrong hill. That goes for everybody else. Clarify, make sure you understand what the problem is. Then you need to develop a decision strategy statement saying what you're really going to do in this decision process. And that seems like an extra step to some people, but I find it particularly helpful because it continues to give you a guidepost throughout the process. Then you develop a set of decision criteria, setting out the factors of the decision process. We're going to spend more time on that. Then you weight the decision criteria according to their importance. This is where we numericize the problem. And we score each of the alternatives using the COAs, if you will, courses of action, using the decision criteria. Then we do a little bit of simple math and multiply the scores times the weighting, and we get a result. That may sound a little complex, but we've developed an easier way to do it. Next slide, please. We're going to use a tool that we developed when I was at Booz Allen. We're going to take a look at this example of rational decision process using a thing called the decision grid. The decision grid is a graphic and numerical tool that takes the rational decision process for choosing between alternatives and makes it visible and numeric. It's really great. It makes the decision process transparent. It makes it logical, rational. It makes it repeatable. You can always explain it. It's explicable. It numericizes it. It is somewhat more objective. It's still a lot of subjectivity to it, but with numericizing, it makes the rank ordering a lot easier. And it's easy and kind of fun to use once you get used to it. However, I will tell you that using the decision grid, like any other decision process, engenders conflict, but that's another topic for another time. So let's go on to the next slide. This is what a decision grid looks like. And again, I'm just giving you this a little bit of background here because this is the rational decision process that we want to use today. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit of detail, but this is what the finished one looks like. And I will tell you that this particular one is what I call a standard business model. Over on the left-hand side, that kind of blue box, under criteria, you've got cost, expected return on investment, time, complexity, strategic, in other words, how well linked is it to the organizational strategy, resources, risk, and reputation. Kind of a standard bunch of criteria. Criteria are those things that we're going to use to actually make the decisions. And this is a standard one. Next slide, please. But the first piece up on top that I just highlighted is the overall strategy. So we're going to choose a course of action with max linkage to strategy, minimum risk, maximum ROI, low complexity, and reasonable cost. Now, this is the kind of direction or guidance that you get from senior people, or you have put together yourself if you're the senior people. You need to have a way to go. You need to understand what you're going to do because you're going to take that paragraph and you're going to turn that into numbers with criteria as we march on forward. Next slide, please. So again, I talked about the criteria up front. After you get the strategy piece, you need to figure out what are the individual elements that you're going to use to actually make this decision. In this case, we've got what, six? We've got eight criteria, whatever it is. And this is the standard business model. You will also note that there are things probably that aren't there, like politics or bias. So one of the reasons that I love this little tool is because it makes people become transparent. We'll talk a little bit more as we go on. Next slide, please. Now we do the weighting, and in this case, I use a score between 1 and 10. Never use 0, it screws up the math. Just 1 and 10. You can use 13 to 74 if you want to, but 1 to 10 is pretty much what everybody understands. And in the salmon-colored box down below is how we lay it out. But what we're doing is we're weighting each one of those criteria as to its importance in this decision process. Next slide, please. Now over here, I've got the 3 courses of action, and they've already been scored. But this is a step you have to go through. You have to score each one of the attributes of the criteria in each one of the courses of action. And the attributes will be different. So for instance, you can see that on cost, in course of action number 1, it has a 7. Okay, 7 is pretty good. That means got a low cost. In course of action 2, it's got a 3. That means it's a high cost. Little complexity there. The box down here with the numbers further explains that. Next slide. And this is the totals. This is where we start to make some sense out of this. Next slide. And this is the actual math. So what we do to generate all of the numbers in the totals is we multiply the weighting times the score, and we come up with a total for that COA. So in this particular case, we've got expected ROI at a 9, and course of action number 1, it's a 6, so we get a 54. We repeat that and fill out the entire box. Next slide, please. Okay, now we get totals. Okay, so what do the totals mean? Go to the next slide. pretty simply, we have set this model up, this rational decision model, where we rank order these courses of action. And we've set it up so that the highest number is the best. Well, obviously, course of action number 3 is quote unquote the best, based on this criteria and based on this weighting. Now, I want to say this, and I'll say this several times. None of what we're doing here today, either AI or the decision grid, is a magic decision box. It's an assistance. It's an assistant. It will help you get to make your own decisions. But you got to remember that this is put together by usually a group of people, and they may have hidden some criteria. They may not agree on the weighting, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and get back on track about how this fits into AI. So I like to use AI as my decision team because I believe that important decisions are a team sport. We teach this in my class. I can sit alone in my office, and I'm up here in lovely Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I've got a beautiful office, and I do a lot of work here, but I work alone most of the time. Sometimes my wife will join me, sometimes the dogs. They're not real good at this kind of stuff. But when I'm making an important decision, I want other people. So I use AI as my decision team. I ask AI questions, and I get responses that help direct my thoughts. They don't tell me the answers all the time, although they try to. Sometimes I ask the same question a couple of different ways to see how AI will respond as a cross-check. And again, when we get into the actual grunt work of filling out the next example, you'll see how that works. I will do one process, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times, changing the verbiage of my conversation with AI to see how it responds. And it can be telling. It's very interesting. I also cross-check with other open sources on the internet that I feel are reasonably dependable. And yes, even though I teach at a couple of colleges, I do use Wikipedia, but I don't believe that 100% of the time. You always got to cross-check. It's like the old days of being a good newspaper man. You got to get 3 sources at least to verify your thing. So, and I like to use AI at multiple points in this decision-making process. I like to use it for developing the decision strategy and statement. That's really important. Developing a logical and functional set of criteria, those two to go together, and we'll see how that works. And then weighting those criteria, because that's really the core of the rational decision process. And then at the end, I will use it to review my choices for logic and function. And I always remind myself that it's not a magic decision box. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to use a notional case study that I use in my class, Thinking to Thrive. And it requires us to decide the order of priority of delivery of vaccine for a deadly virus across 16 segments of society. I've been teaching this course for several years now, and what we did is we looked back on the COVID experience, and we put this into a case study, and it's real world based, obviously, and it's always very interesting to see how the students compare to the actual choices made by the government and the other people who were involved in this process. It's really kind of cool. It's a lot of fun. Next slide. So the first step, as we said, is to come up with this strategy statement. And the strategy statement is a foundation for the entire thing. And it often comes in the shape of a suggestion or direction or guidance from above. If you've been in the military, I worked in the Pentagon for several years, you would get guidance from a general officer. That was kind of dressing up, very prettily exactly what he wanted you to do. Oh, by the way, he may not get that right, so you had to go back and check it. In this particular case, and in the last example we had a strategy that basically said the goal is to determine the optimal choice between 3 courses of action that is in lockstep with our corporate strategy, has an above average ROI and risk level. That was the guidance, and we turned that into a strategy statement that I showed you before. But let's go ahead to the next slide, and we'll apply it to this new piece. Okay, I use ChatGPT 4.0, 4, whatever you want to call it. And that's what I use for this exercise. That's the one where you pay a little bit of money every month. There are free versions. I did not do this with the free version, but I think you get probably pretty much the same answer. So again, the first question is about the decision strategy. So the question that I had to put together, this is me now, working with AI, I've got to start with a question. So the question I wrote was, okay, Write me a strategy statement for a program that prioritizes the order in which a vaccine for a deadly virus will be distributed that balances the need to save lives and maintain the economy. So I picked two, what I thought was key elements. Now, if you pick 3, you're going to get a different answer. You pick 4, you're going to get a different answer. 1, you get a different answer. This is where I wanted to start. I've done this particular exercise 100 times now, and I think that those are the 2 big balancing pieces. We wanted to save lives, but at the same time, we had to maintain the economy. So that's the question I used to ask AI. Let's go to the next slide. And here's AI's answer. And it was a 2-page paper. It gave me a strategy statement right up front, which is that one thing that says objective, to efficiently allocate and administer the vaccine for the deadly virus to maximize both public health impact and support economic continuity. Okay, their words are better than mine. I'm not hung up on that. That's good. Now, it gave me a bunch of stuff I didn't ask for. It gave me strategic priorities. And AI will do this because, remember, AI learns the same way we do, by listening and figuring out how things work. So immediate immunization, supporting essential workers, phased rollout of the general population. This is stuff that's good to know. Wasn't exactly 100% what I asked for, but I got some good stuff. Next page. It goes on. Got 2 full pages on this. And this is very often what will happen. You'll ask a question where you're expecting a 1-paragraph answer, and you get 2 or 3 pages. And it, down at the bottom, had some very interesting things to talk about outcome goals. This is way beyond what I asked for. Maximize COVID-19 related mortality and severe disease rates across all populations, blah, 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 blah. And then it even gave me a blurb about implementation of this strategy. Okay, all good stuff to think about, and I'm going to put that in my program. I'm going to think about that. Okay, so now we got to go to the next step. So let's go to, let's see, where are we here? Yeah, go to the next slide, would you please? So now I've got my basic statement and a bunch of other stuff that I didn't ask for, and I need to ask the second question. And the second question is, where do I get my criteria? So up at the top of this, you can say me, that's what I type in, my second question. Tell me what criteria I should use to decide the priority of vaccination for the population of the US for a deadly virus if this is my strategy statement, to efficiently allocate blah, blah, blah. So I gave it back its own words with a little bit of editing to it, okay? And that's now the input for this part of AI's response. And ChatGPT got back to me with a couple of pages. And these are the things that it thinks are the criteria. Risk of severe illness and mortality, occupational exposure, and it breaks it down in between to healthcare workers, essential services. Next page. And this continues. Transmission potential, living conditions, social impact, equity considerations. Now I got to the equity considerations and I was like, okay, ensure access to the vaccine for underserved and marginal communities disproportionately affected by the virus to address health disparities and promote quality and health incomes. That doesn't look like a real criteria. It looks like an editorial statement. It's a good political statement. I need to keep that in mind, but I'm not sure that that fits into what I think is really a criteria for this decision. So, next page. We had another one over here. There we go. We got down to adaptive responses. It's another good suggestion, data-driven adjustments and feedback loops, but it's not really criteria. So there are some things here that I'm not sure that I'm going to use. And oh, by the way, there's a couple of criteria that I think ought to be in there, but let's continue the process. Next page. So this is the long question, okay? So the third question is going to ask for the weighting of the criteria that was given in question 2. So what I need to do is I needed to give it all of the stuff it's given me up to this point. And you can see this is just a loading of what it has given me in terms of responses. And next page. And it starts here. Now, it begins to give me what it thinks, AI, it, I don't know whether to call it it or them, but pronouns are a dangerous place to go these days. I'm going to stick with it. It's a machine. Okay, risk of severe illness, and they say age is highly important, underlying health conditions, and I gave it the details of my 1 to 10 numerics. And it said, okay, fine. And then it got down to occupational exposure, health workers, essential service workers. Next page. And so forth and so on. Transmission potential, societal impact. Interesting. Educators and school staff, key industries. Key industries is, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And again, back to equity considerations. They rank that as very high. And again, I'm not even sure that that's a real criteria for this decision. And since I'm the human in charge of this one, I may not use that. Next page. And this one I found particularly fascinating. Scalability and logistics, okay, interesting. Infrastructure availability, actually a good point that I don't think was actually as well dealt with by the government. But that's in here, an adaptive response. But this last paragraph is an explanation of AI's methodology. It's telling me what it did. Okay, that's kind of cool. Interesting point again, but maybe not something I'm going to be using. Okay, next page. So I've got all this good stuff now. And in this particular example, we're using the decision grid. In other decisions, you may not have to use the decision grid. I happen to be in love with the decision grid because it's numericized, it's orderly. I like it. I've used it hundreds of times and it works real well. So I'm going to take all of this information, I'm going to plug it back into that form that we had before, and let's go to the next page. And this is what the decision grid is telling me. I took all the numbers and I put them in there. Okay, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner, I put in criteria, and it changed a little bit. I got risk of mortality, I got transmission potential, social impact, business impact. That was a little bit different than theirs. The equity considerations I decided to leave in there, logistics, and then capability to adjust. One I hadn't thought of previous, so I pretty much swallowed what they gave me. Now, I did find out that when ChatGPT gave me its rankings, again, 1 through 10 were my instructions. What it really gave me was 6 through 10. There was no ranking less than 6. So what it did is it cut down the spread from 10 to really only 5. So I expanded it again, and I took into account what ChatGPT said. But again, I did some editing, and I came out with this. So now you're saying, okay, fine, we've done all this good stuff, so what? Next page. This is the money page. When we're all said and done, we got all of these things. I got my 16 different categories. You can take a look at the unsorted scores, but the more important one is the sorted scores, because the objective here was to rank order these people in terms of their priority for delivery of the vaccine during the COVID epidemic. A pretty thoughtful real-world thing. Critical workers came up first, running away, 337. Closest to that were healthcare workers. So critical workers and healthcare workers, there's an overlap there. Okay, fine. So I got to go back and detail, probably in a whole page or two, about who fits into critical workers, because they're important. Healthcare workers, obviously. Farm workers is third in this one. Farm workers usually come in a little bit lower, but in this particular case, given what I got from AI, how I modified it based on the criteria and the weighting and the scoring, that's where they came out. Now, another interesting thing here is age 50 to 70 is only number 4. I went back and looked at why that happens. Age 50 to 70, between 50 and 60, you're usually your peak earning years. By the time you get up into your 70s, you're supposed to be retired. I haven't figured that part out yet. So, but they're highly susceptible. So this was the saving the lives piece. The next one down, age 30 to 50, those are the real solid workhorses of our industrial capability, of our economy. So they ranked higher so they are just slightly lower. You can see only 10 points difference between the others. So that was the maintain the economy. So this thing all fits together. Prison guards and then first responders, military, we're a little bit less than half through the pack. Over 70, sorry guys, okay, we love you, but in the balance, you're a little bit lower. You're number 10. And get all the way down to the bottom, cultural icons, which interestingly enough, almost always comes last. So, Bruce Springsteen, get in line with everybody else. So this is the final way this worked out. So I used AI to develop my strategy, to develop my criteria, to develop the weightings, and this is what I came out with in this rational decision process using the decision grid. Next slide, please. So this is the warning again. It's imperative that the results of this process be reviewed with the team that developed the COAs and or the persons who will make the final decisions. Because the decision process that we've used here often produces answers that are unexpected, because the criteria, weights, and scoring may not be in sync with everybody's expectations. And these unexpected results can lead to significant conflicts, so participants need to be forewarned, and a process should be set up in advance to mitigate difficulties. I will tell you a very short story about one time we were doing a consulting job for a small municipality on the East Coast of the United States, working a strategy process for them. And the mayor, who was obviously in charge, wanted to know who his most important customer was. So we used the decision grid. This was pre-AI, but we worked with a group and we did this, and then we came back, and it turned out that according to the weighting and the criteria and the choices that the decision team made, that the most important customer of this particular municipality were the real estate developers. He thought they were going to be the voters or the taxpayers. The mayor got very angry, thought he was going to fire us. He didn't, because when we got back to the second round, we found out that there were people who had hidden criteria from us. So you always got to be careful of this. You're liable to have conflict at the end. Not liable to, I can pretty much guarantee you. So next slide. So again, some common problems using AI, because that's what we're talking about here, AI, for the rational decision process. It's, number one, not asking good questions. If you don't ask it good questions, if you give it garbage, you're going to get garbage back. So you got to be clear, concise, appropriate input, and you will reduce the probability of bad responses. So, and that's terribly important. There are whole classes now on how to talk to AI. I'm still learning that. I spend time with this. I have conversations with it. That's what I do here sometimes. And then there's some other things. Asking questions of AI that it's really not set up to answer. Don't ask it a tax question. So far, I've asked it 4 or 5 times about some moderately complex tax problems, and it's given me horribly wrong answers. Math problems. Simple math, not too hard. When you start getting out there, it just doesn't do very well. Legal questions. This is an area that is growing rapidly. When I first wrote this, legal questions was a big problem. It's less of a problem now. There are people working on inputting entire municipal, federal codes, the entire U.S. code, and legal decisions and so forth. So in the not too distant future, I am sure that there's going to be an AI process set up specifically for legal questions where you can get advice. Partisan political questions. Sometimes it just says, no, we don't want to do that. Technical or scientific questions. You need to be very careful. Also be careful about asking for any type of prediction. Ask for a projection instead. Predictions are for magicians, guys with crystal balls. It's not real. Projections, however, will require you to take data and extrapolate from that. So be careful of the words. Beware of hidden biases. Yes, AI has turned out to have biases, but you got to remember that AI learned everything it knows from us. Beware of the hallucination too. This is really funny. Where AI doesn't know the answer, but it wants to make one up to try and please you. And some of the answers can be hysterical. Again, people are working on that, and it's getting better and better. There's a group up in Buffalo at Canisius University who's working on a very interesting process where they're going to have the capability to plug into specific databases as a balance to the actual algorithms in AI so that you can get a stronger cross-check. And the bottom one is always cross-check for logic, sanity, and alignment with the strategy. And those are kind of, again, an expanded Miranda warning. Next slide, please. So in summary, knowledge on how to use AI is a plus in almost any decision process. And just being able to have someone to talk to that doesn't have a position, isn't going to be writing your efficiency report or your annual evaluation. Somebody to talk to previous. It's like talking to 100,000 people at the same time. It's good to have that kind of thing out there. In its current state, it can be very useful. It's not hard to use. I was a little trepidatious when I first started it, not being a real computer guy, but I've learned to do it. I use it in all kinds of things. It helped me put together this program. It helps me write syllabuses. It sometimes will go out and grab information for me that I wouldn't have on my own. But again, at the end of the day, we need to remember that AI has its limits, and everything you get from it should be filtered through your own thought process before implementing. Next slide. And that's a wrap, folks. That's what I've got to say about using AI in decision-making at the basic level. If you have any questions, you can answer them now. If we don't get to your question, feel free to email me or Jonathan, and we will certainly tackle your questions. Okay, Jonathan, you want to bring us all back? There we are.
Right.
A bigger picture of me. What more do you want out of that?
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did putting it together. This is part of my class, and we're having some fun with it. It's particularly good to get your senior people involved if they haven't done it and show them how it works. It reminds me of the days when computers were magic. Back in the day, my very first computer was a compact, portable, weighed about 40 pounds, had a screen about this big, but I could sell anything with that computer. I would take it to somebody's office and I would plan out their real estate project and show them how it would work with different rents and different things. And boy, we made money with that because it was magic. AI is kind of magic these days. It'll be common. Your children are going to never understand how you live without it. So anyway, you can tell I'm a fan. Other people are scared of it. Yeah, there's things to be scared of. I got that. I work here at the War College, and we discuss things that aren't necessarily standard in a lot of higher educational events. But right now, AI and decision making, I think, is a real plus. So, questions, Jonathan? I think you're in charge of that button.
Yep. That it is. So first, I want to say thank you for an excellent presentation. This was great, and we had a lot of people attend today, so that's awesome. For everyone in attendance, this is your time. If you have questions, if you have comments, things like that, please put them in the chat box. It seems like stuff is starting to come in quite a bit. Let's see if we can find... Let's go back to that first question that was earlier. So can you share any good introductory AI courses? So can you expand on that?
To be honest with you, no. Because I kind of got into this and started doing it before anybody put a course together. So I got a little bit deeper into it. As I said, I did just finish about a 5 or 6 hour thing with the Harvard Business Publication people on teaching with AI, because I'm a teacher. So I wanted to do that. Most of my learning has just been playing with it. And that's the fun part. In advertisements, it'll say, go ahead and call us, no obligation. Well, there's no obligation here. You can sit down and have a fascinating conversation. You want to discuss, Pride and Prejudice with AI and get its view on Darby, you can do that, all right? There's nothing you can't talk to it about. It's just fun to play with. And I have spent several hours doing that. I also then just kind of started doing, how do I solve problems? I need to take some more courses because this thing is going so fast. These guys at Canisius, I can hardly talk to them. They're all computer guys, and it's like half the time I don't know what they're talking about. So I'm afraid I don't have that list, but I tell you what, I will undertake to do a little bit of research, and I will get one back to Jonathan in the next week or two so that he will be equipped and you can come back to him.
Right.
That's a good question.
Excellent. So next question. Timothy Baker wants to know, how long did it take you to spin up to a basic competency level with this process or with the AI tools?
I would say in hours, 2 full days, about 24 hours. I guess that's 3 days for most people, 3 8-hour days. And that's just screwing with it for the most part. Mm-hmm. The first couple of times I used it, obviously it didn't necessarily work out too well, but it was pretty obvious it wasn't working out. I learned right up front that one of the most important pieces is learning how to phrase your questions. and I'm getting better at that. There are entire courses now, and I think Georgetown has a couple of, right here at SCS, we have some AI type courses. You probably got that in front of you there.
I do. There's gonna be
Oh,
a
good. Here's your segue. Sell something, for Christ's sake. But it's the phraseology. To beat that, because I'm not an expert at that, I will regularly ask the same question 3, 4, 5 times, different ways, using different words, to see what happens and what comes out. Only on one or two occasions has there been a radical difference, and I couldn't quite tie it all together why, but at any rate, that's my. Why don't you mention some of the classes, because I know I just got the email about that.
Oh,
Want to
yeah.
talk about that later? Good.
Yeah, let's do it right now. Okay, so
Sure.
everybody, so you got to get some sort of plug in here. Um, so this is what we do. We're professional certificate programs, and so I want to draw your attention to some of our new ones. We have our brand new ones with certificate in Gen AI for team productivity. Uh, this also, I would like to announce that counts for, I think it's 56 PDUs towards the continuing education requirement for a PMP certification. So,
Yeah, I got to say, this one looks like a great one.
yeah, so this one starts in September. It's going to be an online, so this means asynchronous. And then there's one other one I'd like to bring your attention to that involves AI. This is their certificate in AI governance and compliance. So please go ahead. You'll receive all this links to this stuff too after the fact with our video link. But some of the stuff we did today, but in much more detail, and then obviously the governance and compliance aspect of it. This one starts in September 30th as well. So yeah, and then is there, while we're at it, I mean, do you want to give a plug for your courses or anything like that?
Sure, Thinking to Thrive.
Yeah.
12-week course, and we spend pretty much all of our time focusing on, first, how human beings think, so we understand what we're coping with, and then we move from there through the works of Dr. Daniel Kahneman, who unfortunately just died a couple of months ago. Huge brain, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. A book, if you don't have it, you ought to. Read it, it's worthwhile. Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, Dr. Kahneman. And then we go into the various tools, methodologies, and processes of rational and logical decision making. We also talk a lot about biases, how to recognize them. And in the process of this, I actually uncovered a couple of biases I held myself that had been buried in the back of my brain forever. So I was able to take care of that better. We meet for about an hour and 15 minutes once a week for 12 weeks. It's a pass-fail course, as a lot of the SCS stuff is, and we do a couple of case studies in here. It's a lot of fun. It's you'll get to do this case study again, your own. So I also saw a question go by very quickly, and I'm probably not going to phrase this right, but the question was basically, are you comfortable asking AI to make a prediction? And I will say no, not a prediction. And I want to be thoughtful about this. It's like the difference between when somebody says, I believe something or I think something. If you think it, that implies a logical process. If you say, I believe, then it's part of your belief process. It may be religious, it may be philosophical, and there's no argument with that. We can have a discussion if you say, I think. It's the same thing with prediction and projections. I was in a banking business for a long time. I was a consultant in the commercial real estate business, and people were always asking me to predict what was going to happen. And I did that once or twice when I was young, and it turned out to be a mess. It finally dawned on me the best I could do was a projection. And again, that goes back to taking a look at a set of data, and here you can use AI on the fringes of that. But a projection is taking current data, current fact, as we talk about, visible facts, and making projections from there, either mathematically, graphically, however you do it. But predictions, AI will give you a prediction. I'm not comfortable with that. I hope that's an answer to that question.
Yes.
Cool.
Let's go to another one here. I got a few here that are interesting. Among the Gen AI options, are there any ones you would avoid?
I don't know enough to answer that question appropriately, to be honest with you. I picked kind of one of the early ones, and ChatGPT, and I stuck with that. I started with one, and then they went to two and three, and then when they went to four, I understand they're coming out with another one if it's not already out. This stuff moves so fast, you can't stay up with it. And anybody who says they're an expert in this, may be an expert today, but tomorrow there'll be 10 new things. There was another question there, how do I keep up? Go out and ask ChatGPT what's happened. It's like everything else. You want to be a good decision maker, you got to stay involved, which means read everything. If you're not reading, you're not part of the game. Sorry, long answer, short question.
No problem. I like this one. This question is from Steve Shapiro. He's asking, can you share how you can use these tools to resolve conflict, and if not, what are the options to keep the value?
Okay. Yeah, all right. So that's another lengthy class. Conflict and how to handle it. There are many different schools to this. A lot of it ties in the organizational sense to what we call change management, where you are trying to introduce something new to an organization, be that a culture or even something as simple as a new accounting system, and trying to get people to go along with it. The Harvard School of Change Management is based on values. It's very good. Soft hands. The change management that I learned, interesting enough, at Georgetown and as a consultant working for Booz Allen and Toffler and working on my own, is a little bit less soft-handedness. But that's a very long discussion. Handling conflict is a complex event. It depends completely on your environment. A conflict in a family is not handled the same way you do on the shop floor. It's a massive. If you think I'm trying to avoid the answer, I'm not. It's just too big to do right here. I have a bunch of material here, and I've been kind of thinking about putting something together on more detail on conflict management in an organizational sense, because amongst other things, I'm also an executive coach. We deal with a lot of that in executive coaching. Senior guys who are uncomfortable with conflict. You can't be uncomfortable with conflict. You've got to be able to handle that. You can't run away from it. If you're going to be part of the decision team or the decider, conflict is there. So you better get used to it and learn how to deal with it. And for some people, that's very difficult. I get that. My background in training, I was a soldier for almost 33 years. That's what we do. And so I have a slightly different approach. So again, I apologize. That's kind of a long and rambling answer, but that's a much shorter answer than the 3 or 4 days it would take to work through that process. Yeah. Thank you for asking it, though, because it's a seriously important thing. And if my boss is still listening, I'd still like to teach that course. I'd like to put together a conflict management course with a couple of other people. Maybe Jamie Kralovic, and we'll get a psychiatrist and, have some fun with it. Sorry.
Sounds good. All right, let's keep it rolling. We'll take a couple more here because we're starting to get close to our time boundary. But I'll try to get in as many as we can here. So Lawal, I think, is the name here. Thank you for a great presentation. What are the methodologies of identifying bias in AI decision outputs? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the cross-check. There's a kind of a list of standard biases that people have that once you begin to work with the decision process, you kind of enumerate. I have a list of about 15 or 20 kind of what I call standard biases that I keep that list over here, and every now and then I glance at it and go, okay, is this all making sense? There's plenty of biases in real life. There's racial bias, there's sexual bias, there's sexual orientation bias, there's political bias, there's regional biases, People in West Virginia may do things different than they do in California. They're innumerable. You have to kind of, what's the best way to describe this? Once you become aware of some of the biases, working through this, come take my course, we spent a lot of time on this, and then you become aware of it, and you will begin to see biases pop up in conversations, in decision processes. And chances are that the individual who is biased may not even recognize it. That's the interesting part. And I will share with you, without the detail, that I discovered in this process of working this stuff together. I identified some of my own biases that, frankly, had probably gotten in my way along the line. So, learn to live with it. Not all biases are bad, by the way. A bias is just a bias. That it says that you lean that direction. Some biases can work for the good, some biases can be bad. So you need to sort those out. Again, kind of a long and rambling answer. I apologize. I don't think there's a neat tool. There's no box that we can put stuff in and it feeds you out the other side their biases. But there was one AI algorithm, I can't remember which one, that turned out to have a male-female bias. Apparently, all of the people who were feeding it data were male. Big surprise. So, it can pop up any place.
Okay. I want to do one last question because I think this one, there's other questions here. Sorry if I can't get to everyone, but I like this one here, so I'm going to go with it.
Okay.
So Elaine wants to know, from an ethical and then some cases legal perspective, how should you disclose that AI may have been used in any product/information developed?
Here's what I tell my students. If you use AI, footnote it. Tell me you used it. I got no problem with that. There are some people who think that the use of AI, particularly in academic work, is cheating. I don't believe that. But if you go out and ask AI to write you a 4-page paper and then you turn that paper in for grading, I will probably figure it out because I've seen enough of those now. And there are programs that apparently are available that will catch you, and that's plagiarism. Using AI to help you write a paper, to come up with concepts, to have conversations with, I'm all good with that. Just footnote it.
Okay, excellent.
Yep.
So, with that saying, I would like to thank you again so much for your time, your effort. You went out and researched and came up with a whole presentation here that I appreciate and love. And so we've gotten some great feedback in the comments and lots of thank you. So I think this was an excellent presentation, and I want to thank you so much for this.
Well, good. And, I encourage, if you have further questions, I think this deck is available to everybody. My contact information is there, or you can get it right through Jonathan. I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. This has been Knowledge at Noon, using AI to make better decisions with Stewart Brown. Thank you so much.